Kristine, take it away.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. It's not often that I'm placed at the first session of a conference. I'm often placed at the end or right after lunch because I have that level of energy. But I'm so glad you're here, especially against two other great sessions. One about writing, which is always, for me, writing is always something that I am, learning more about. And then strategies for math comprehension, math language and comprehension, which is a really great session as well. So thank you for being here with me for strengthening CCRS ELA alignment vocabulary. And thank you to Patsy for her wonderful text slide where I always expect her to say, and there is a flotation device under your seat, but you will not need it unless we ask you to take it out. So she would be a wonderful flight attendant. So welcome to my session. I am Kristine Kelly, and I do a lot of things, and I'm not going to go through all these things, but anything having to do with literacy and the college and career readiness standards. With Martin's retirement, I've also taken on Embry and STAR, but I do have a reading background, and I am a certified STAR trainer, so I can't replace her, but I certainly can do some of the work. Also, recently, I've been doing more with integrated education and training. And one more thing is I am, some of you know this, I am a doctoral student now. I don't put that up there to brag because I don't know that it's necessarily something that people should envy. But I put that up there because I want you to know that in the next few years, as much as I can, my focus, and even with my dissertation, will be on adult basic ed learners and particularly writing. So anything I learn, I will be bringing forward to my trainings and things. So I'm really excited to apply a lot of what I've learned. Okay, so today's objectives. We're going to talk briefly about where vocabulary instruction is emphasized in the CCRS. We are going to classify 3 tiers of words. Now, many of you, I'm sure, have heard about the 3 tiers of words. I have found some additional details, I think, that are really interesting about each of the tiers of words, and a little bit about depth of vocabulary. Talk a little bit about using a word highlighter and how quickly you can find a variety of different words to focus on using these tools. We're going to talk a little bit about what vocabulary to teach from a text, and then I have some concrete vocabulary activities and some ways to play with vocabulary that can be done at multiple levels. So we all have holes, just like our students. So we've been talking about academic vocabulary for a long time in Minnesota in STAR instruction and Embry instruction, and so we all know things about academic vocabulary. We're going to review just a little bit. So some of you may already know the information, and some of you it may be new. And even when I do a lot more reading on vocabulary instruction and applying it to adults, I'm constantly learning new things. So we have holes like our students. So let's chat in the chat box, please. Couple questions here. What do you like most about teaching vocabulary? Because for most of us, vocabulary is a lot of fun to teach, and it's something that students really love to learn. What do you like most? And what are challenges, or what is a challenge you face when teaching vocabulary? So I'd appreciate it if you drop something in the cognates, such an amazing tool. And we need to definitely, be reminding our students who can to use cognates. Time. Students are engaged. Yes, so many fun activities, especially because we need to recycle. How to go deep. Okay, I love it when students say, you know what, I was watching a show on TV last night, and guess what I heard? I heard one of our words, or they hear it on the radio, or they see it in a magazine. Yes, they want to learn. Oh, so many great things here. Yes, it's they can use it immediately. Breaking up words. Yes, this idea of teaching them some word strategies so that they can be more independent with figuring out words. The connections. I notice that when I'm beginning to teach vocabulary and I'm starting to ask students to make those connections, there's so many really cool things that that I learn about students and that they learn about each other. Great. Yes, the definition is not enough. There are so many words. Thank you. Yes. And that can make it difficult because there are better words to teach, or not better, but higher utility words to teach. So that's something we want to talk about with our students. Thank you so much. Knowledge is power. Yes, absolutely. And of course, when we talk about academic vocabulary, it is not the best vocabulary to know. It's additional vocabulary. And I'm very clear with my students that we know all kinds of words and we use them in all different kinds of situations. The key is to have the words that we want to use in whatever the context is. It's a tool. It's just another type of language. Thank you so much. I am going to be definitely saving this chat. I love this quote. I've been taking it with me for a while. I know you can read it, but I love to read it. Words are never just words. They hint, coax, signify, and point out. They create worlds, delineate character, evoke emotions, encourage response. They are little tools of power. Who doesn't love that feeling of knowing just the right word at the right moment? I am so in love with this quote. I found it about a year ago, and the little tools of power. And so let's talk about vocabulary, and I'm going to give some background. I am going to be asking you to chat things in the box. We are going to be doing a couple fun group activities, so that will keep everything moving. I see asking my students not to use a translator in their homework, but then asking them to use their translators during vocabulary or word of the day lessons. We want our students to use whatever tools are at their disposal for this. So don't feel like a hypocrite. Vocabulary in the CCRS. These are rhetorical questions, but where is vocabulary called out in the shifts? Complexity, evidence, and building knowledge. Where is it called out in the standards? Shift 1, complexity. It's directly called out here. Regular practice with complex text and academic language. And a key piece here is that academic vocabulary, it can't just be in the texts. It's great to have a text and say, wow, there's a lot of rich vocabulary here. That is the first step. But students need to be engaged in working with that vocabulary and in multiple ways, not only like a couple close exercises or a matching activity. That's how I used to do things, but they need to dive deep with some of these key words. Now we're talking high utility words related to key ideas that unlock the gist. These are words we provide in direct instruction. These are words that have multiple meanings or contexts, and our students often may know one way of using the word, but they may not recognize it in the context of the text that we're using. Why and how certain words are used, this idea of being precise and this idea of tone and that, again, evoking emotion. Relationships between words, that's a big piece. Independent word study strategies. I know that I saw some, breaking up words, word parts, word families, and recycle, play, experiment. There's so much play that can happen with vocabulary. Some of you may be familiar with the tool that we have. We introduce it in the CCRS cohorts that we do every few years. You don't have to be familiar with it. This is really the key I want to focus on for a moment here. When evaluating any lesson or a resource, We want to look at how academic vocabulary is included in the instruction. And we want the lesson or the resource to regularly focus, and not only on the vocabulary, but words and phrases, how these words and phrases are related, nuances, those nuances with synonyms, connotation, but particularly general academic words and phrases. So we want lots of questions and tasks that support students unpacking this language. We want vocabulary words selected that are primarily academic vocabulary. They're key to understanding the text, and we want to focus on building their academic vocabulary and syntax throughout. So vocabulary is one of those things, and I'll show you a little bit later how easy it is to just to play and drop a simple vocabulary practice task, no matter what content you're teaching, no matter what vocabulary you're using. So we have vocabulary called out pretty much directly in these ELA anchors. We have a reading anchor for where students at the higher levels have to really look at words and how those words, why authors choose certain words and not others, and how they impact the text. We've got meaning, style, tone, determining meaning of unknown words. We have the figurative language pieces, word relationships, nuances, and then the anchor, the language anchor, where students actually develop skills to gather vocabulary knowledge and unlock words independently. But boy, it's implied all over in the standards. Vocabulary, we love to teach it. Our students love to learn it. And my students would do vocabulary for hours, right? And we want to, keep our eye on other things that we need to be teaching. But it is so prevalent in the ELA standards that that spending good time on it is definitely justified. And for example, and please go back to your chat box, reading anchor 2. This one is determining central ideas or themes and analyzing development and summarizing. Okay. Where is vocabulary implied here? Think about what kind of vocabulary students would need in order to do tasks focused on this anchor. Determining central ideas, themes, their development, and summarizing. Go ahead and put in the chat box. Vocabulary needed to summarize. What kind of vocabulary? Give me an example. Yes, they need, oh boy, yes. They need synonyms. They need understanding relationships between words. They need, details require sophisticated words. They need transition words. They need to show an organization of ideas. Somebody hit it. When we ask them to summarize and paraphrase, I know you know what I mean when I say this is one of the most difficult things. And even my higher level students, they need to know words in order to summarize and paraphrase within that summary. So much of it is about vocabulary. And so our English learners, even when they make it into the high school equivalency classroom, they need synonyms, they need antonyms, they need to build that knowledge. Develop and strengthen writing as needed by planning, revising, editing, rewriting, or trying a new approach. Where does vocabulary fall here with this idea of effective writing and the writing process? Where might we focus in on vocabulary? Thank you to those of you who are saying, yes, students do need to know these words: paraphrase, summarize, analyze. It's very important. Academic vocabulary is the language of school. It's the language of assessment. So when we're doing the writing process, very sentence structure, yes, They need different words. Absolutely. Here we talk about precision as well, right? Where in the editing and revising, we may be working with students to stretch and use more precise words or vary their words or their sentence structure, transitional words and phrases. And of course, we can see then that reciprocal nature of reading and writing, as students learn the vocabulary and work more with transition words and words that show relationships, then hopefully that will come out and we can encourage that to be used in their writing. And as they write with more of these words, these key words that show relationships, they should be able to apply that to their reading as well. Okay, and finally, speaking and listening anchor. And I think, again, we've kind of said a lot of these things, presenting information, findings. Again, as so many of you have said, those transition words, those words that help organize what we are saying so that the people who are listening can follow clearly our ideas and the progression of our ideas. And then we talk about being appropriate to the audience. So there's vocabulary there as well, where obviously we would adapt depending on the audience that we have, depending on the situation that we are speaking at. So vocabulary is implied. It is so important to reading and writing and speaking and listening. Formal academic vocabulary instruction generally begins here at low intermediate ABE. I put up some CASA schools and some TABE scores, and high intermediate ESL. This is typically when formal happens, meaning they are writing with it. They are actively learning it through explicit instruction and spending time on it. That doesn't mean that we don't work on academic vocabulary at lower levels, but what's key is that below these levels, we help to build the foundation. And the way we can do that is expose students through conversation, through read alouds, through the videos, other oral language activities. So it is exposing them to a lot of these words. And I remember training with Bergen from Literacy Minnesota, and she was talking about working with a fairly low level of English learner class. And she said, I teach the word evidence, like evidence. And it's just, we just use it. We bring it into conversation, and I just expose them to that word. They don't necessarily need to know how to spell it. They don't need to know all the ways to use it. They don't need to write down all these definitions, but it is a word that we incorporate and we start using. So that is important. I just love them. I keep glancing at the chat box, and I will read everything. And I hope you're all reading the comments from your colleagues as well. So when it comes to academic vocabulary and lower levels, I'm really a big fan of this quote from Dr. Robin Scarcella, and this idea that we tend to teach informal survival English first and then academic language, but we can be laying a foundation for academic language while teaching conversation skills. So that is something to keep in mind. And particularly for those of you who teach learners who are on the who are NRS levels, ABE, low beginning and high beginning. If you're giving the TABE and you're giving the TABE in math, that TABE E is loaded with academic vocabulary for math. So there's definitely a need for exposure to academic vocabulary, even if our students haven't reached that low intermediate level. And you may recognize this person. I've heard really good things about this Patsy Egan, who reminds us that the work we're doing, it's part of the larger field of adult education. We play a major role in preparing learners for post-secondary career training, better paying jobs, and deeper, more rewarding community involvement. Advanced language, the things that our students want to do, the stories that they want to express. They need advanced language in many cases. So love her. Yes, I've heard that she knows some things. So you may want to look Dr. Patsy Egan up. So we talk about direct word exposure, explicit instruction of these words, multiple exposures, word learning strategies, okay? How can students, when they're not with us and there's not context, how can they determine the meanings of words, relationships between words, and recycling and play? These are 4 components that we need to focus on. And text variety, lots of text, and text beyond text that we use in our published resources. A lot of the text in our published resources is written as a learning tool. So there's authentic language, organization, all kinds of things that don't necessarily appear in instructional resources that do an authentic text of adult lives. So we want to make sure that we expose them to all kinds of different text. So let's talk about some word levels, and then we're going to do a little activity. So we have 3 tiers. We have the content specific, the brick words, we call them, the general academic or mortar words, and the common everyday words. I am not as big on metaphors as Patsy is, but early on, I loved this metaphor. Like the tier 1 for me is it's the ground. I want to build a wall, and tier 1 it's the ground, and I want solid ground to build something on. And then I have my pile of bricks, which are my very discipline specific, content specific words. And I need to stack them just right to create this wonderful wall. Unfortunately, I need to connect the bricks with something. And in order to connect them and build a really strong wall, my husband is a garden designer. He builds beautiful garden walls. We got to secure them together. And that is where these academic or mortar words come in. They hold these bricks together on a strong foundation so that your wall is very, very strong. I do love that metaphor. So let's talk quickly about these tiers. This might be a review for some of you. For some of you, you might go, oh yeah, of course. I know naturally that, there are different levels of words. Tier 1 words, frequently in conversation, they typically, not always, typically don't have more than 1 meaning. These are sight words. They're function words that we need right away. They're words that name objects. They're early reading words, some idioms, everyday expressions. They're really the things that we need to kind of get along and do a lot of basic things in our adult lives. They're not typically modified, so they're not loaded down with word parts. For native English speakers or speakers or students whose primary language is English, they often don't need a lot of explicit instruction in these words as far as knowing them. Now, as far as spelling them, that's a whole different thing. English learners typically know the concept in their primary language, but not necessarily in English. And there are a huge percentage of words that students read. We'll talk a little bit about word frequency lists. So these are just, I started studying Spanish again on Duolingo. I studied it in high school. Some of you know I changed to Russian in college. But I look at these words and I go, you know what? I know these words in Spanish. I don't know a whole lot of Spanish, but you know what? I know that yellow is amarillo. I know that cold is frío. I know that book is libro. I know that tree is árbol. I know to talk is hablar. I know these. I don't know a lot of other words for cold. I couldn't say freezing. I couldn't say chilly. I couldn't say brisk, but darn it, I know cold. Okay. So I think of it in terms of my own language learning. So let's take a moment. A, B, or C, please put in the chat box, which are tier 2? Which lists do you think are really the tier 2 words? Or rather, I should say, which list is all tier 2? Sue Ann says they all are. C. C is the list where all of the words are considered tier 2. They are applicable in many different contexts and different content areas. A, there are a few words, juxtapose. I've taught juxtapose before, and myriad. You start to get into extrapolate, aesthetic, digress, superfluous. We're not saying these aren't great words, but they aren't as high utility. The middle are your tier 3 words. And it was interesting because I did a presentation for the faculty at Hennepin Tech, and they said our students are having a really hard time with text. And I put this in front and I said, well, which do you think are the words that your students are most missing? And they said, oh, definitely B. B, they should know the other words. And I said, oh, okay, because let's talk a little bit about C. Okay, these are the words that connect ideas together so that they can learn the B words. French words. I've always had students, Spanish speaking students use cognates, but I had a French student last year who also made great use of French cognates. So academic vocabulary, they're commonly used in academic settings. We don't use these words as much in conversation. Students will say, well, I wouldn't say my husband and I came to a consensus last night about going on a vacation. I would say my husband and I agreed about it. And I said, absolutely, yes. I would probably say agreed too, but they are other important words. They're high utility. They're multiple meanings. They're often presented. There's not context with these words. There's an assumption that in academic text that people know these words. They connect other words and concepts. They're about precision. They're more abstract. They're key to comprehension. And these are where we want to spend our time with explicit instruction. So here again, you can think of, we did principle, and my students really wrestled with that last year, principle and principle. So we did both the PLE and the AL. And so these are words that validity, we can use that word in math, we can use that word in science, we can use that word talking about the validity of the documents that you bring in to get your driver's license or some other kind of license. And here's the key, not all of them are equal, okay? So the focus should be on words that can't be demonstrated or are not cognates. Definitely have students use their cognate knowledge, absolutely. But there are some tier 2 words that are more limited in scope. So think about the mileage. How useful is a word? And I have a great example here. Both precipitate and overview are considered academic words. If both of them appear in a text and I'm limited on time, I'm going to go with overview. Precipitate is a great word, but think about overview and the mileage for our students, hearing about an overview of the training. I'm going to give you an overview of the class. Their boss saying, let me do an overview of the schedule for next week, an overview of the process. Oh, in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to give you an overview of this product. There's a lot of mileage. Okay, so think about that as well when you are faced with choosing which academic words to focus on. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Tier 3 words, they're very specific and they're related to a specific need. We should teach these in a content area. These are words that tend to be derived from Greek. Tier 2 words are often derived from Latin. They're key to understanding academic subjects. They're often defined in texts. The definitions are given, there's a glossary, they're in bold, they're underlined, they're in italics. We expect that students are going to need to learn those words because these are the specific words. In lower level text, just tell them what it means. You don't have to spend time, say, and this is what the word means, and move on from there. And again, I didn't have any math words in here and I got dinged by a math colleague. So there's parabola. It's not to say that you can't use these words in other ways, but they typically are associated with some kind of content area. I enjoy idioms in all caps in the chat box. Yes, my students love to learn idioms because it makes them feel more fluent, my ELs. So we're going to spend a few minutes and I'm going to give you a high CCRS level B, low C. So if you want to talk about grade levels, which we tend to not talk about in adult basic ed, we're talking about high, I'd say maybe third grade into fourth grade. So you may think that if you teach kind of that CCRS level B, that this would be too challenging, but this falls within the range of what we can be using to work with students. That doesn't mean that there's not complexity and that there's a lot of work to be done with this. So I am going to give the slide, and Rob is gracious enough to put these directions in the chat box. You're going to look for 4 tier 2 words, 3 tier 3 words, 2 words that have multiple meanings. So it doesn't matter the tier, but students may know a particular meaning, may not know the meaning as it's used in this text. And maybe 1 word you're just not sure about. Like, I'm not sure what tier this would be on, if it would even, be in one of the tiers we're talking about. Words can overlap tiers, okay? So thank you very much, Rob. It's in the chat box. Your 4 tier 2, 3 tier 3, 2 words with multiple meanings, 1 word you're not sure about. And we're going to spend about 5 minutes. I will time that. And here is, it's a science paragraph. Jot it down wherever you are, your answers. Yes, Patsy, thank you. Finding your last word. Please go ahead and find that. I'm looking at the chat box. Mary Jo, I see that you are 6-way paragraphs. I don't care how old that resource gets. I'm going to use 6-way paragraphs. There are so many ways you can use those texts, or even an excerpt from one of those texts. They're great for they're great exposure to nonfiction text. Again, beyond the 6 questions that take them through different kinds of comprehension questions, the texts are really valuable. So don't go getting rid of a lot of resources that you've used for a long time. We may repurpose them, but I found that a lot of texts that I don't use necessarily in ways I used to use, I still use for the text. Okay. So I just want to, you're going to get a chance to get into small groups here in a few moments and do an activity, but I just want to highlight that these words in orange would be considered tier 2 words. Puzzle is an interesting word. You may have put puzzle down as a word with multiple meanings, and that's fine. But in this case, it's pretty literal. It is a puzzle piece. They're not having to puzzle something. And of course, we look at some of these other words that are really that are really key. Words like process, convert. I had a student who said, well, convert, I know what convert means. It means like if you marry somebody from a different religion, you might convert to like being Catholic. And I said, absolutely, that is absolutely a correct use of that word. It wasn't working for her though in this particular text. So because we have adults, their knowledge of things, we laugh about, or we used to, laugh because it was so true when we started STAR vocabulary testing, because we'd ask a student, what is the meaning of the word decline? And many times the students would say, it's what happens with your credit card if you don't have any more money to spend. And that's absolutely a way to use decline. They weren't very comfortable using it like the decline of civilization, right? And so we have to think about that. Absorb, nutrients, these are releases. These are key to really understanding this process that's being talked about here. The next level, I have what would be considered academic vocabulary words, or tier 3 words. So of course, carbon dioxide. Oxygen makes it now as a tier 2 word. Carbon dioxide, those seedling, photosynthesis, these are really some of those content words, and words that that do have different meanings. It doesn't mean that these would confuse your students. The students in front of you. You might say, my students know that, leaves can be a verb, but it's also, we don't have to work on that one. But my students sometimes get mixed up with order, especially that phrase, in order for or in order to. And we usually have to spend a little bit of time on that. Also, blade. Blade is often, especially for my ELs, brand new way of talking about the word blade, as far as how it fits with grass. Are you going to teach all of these words? No, we're going to talk a little bit about that, but you're going to think about for your particular group, what have you done leading up to this? What is their general comfort with a lot of these words? And it's going to differ from group to group. So when we talk about breadth, my students come in and they say, I want to learn 500 words in the next 2 months. And I say, great, not going to happen, right? Not with academic vocabulary. I teach 3 words a week when I'm teaching students. I used to teach 10, then 5, and my students were like, could we do less or fewer words? And of course I said, of course, we went to 3, and I saw much better retention. But we also want the depth. We want those related words and nuances. We want words, and we want to talk about them with multiple meanings. We had quite a time during the spring talking about the word counter, because the majority of my students were not comfortable using the word counter in an argument. We were talking about GED argument, essay writing. Counter, to counter a claim, to counter an opponent. That was not a word that was not a meaning they were comfortable with. And collocations, words that go together. Some of you spend a lot of time with phrasal verbs because there are so many of them, but also adjective noun phrases like fast food, regular exercise, learning environment. Word association. I like to do this. It's a fairly easy activity. You can do it in some different ways. You can use synonyms, you can use collocations, you can use words that have alternate meanings in what you're doing to what students might know, other relationships. Here's the key. The key is that students have to choose words that go with the word in the square. They have to explain the connections. And that is really important, because explaining those connections helps that word and that helps that word get down deeper. And it also exposes, if you're in a small group of students, it exposes students to other contexts. So we're going to actually do that here. And this is going to be the one thing we're going to do before break. And it's word association. I have the word vocabulary in the middle. That is the word that you're going to try to connect to 3 of the words in circles. Okay. It doesn't matter how you decide to connect them. You might connect them in a sentence. You might connect them with an example. You might connect them, talk about, a personal experience. Like the previous one, sometimes students will say summer school, because you know what, I've been thinking and I don't think I'm going to go to summer school. Okay, that's a great connection. So we're going to just take a couple minutes. I want you to make a connection between vocabulary and 3 of the words in circles. And then we're going to get into small breakout groups, and you're going to get an opportunity to share with each other a few of those connections you made. So if you have a piece of paper handy, you can go ahead and grab 3 of those words and just be prepared to share your connection. Karen, thank you. I see your, yeah. The key is things that other people don't think of. That's the exposure to other contexts. So make sure you jot those down. Okay, Patsy, would you put us into, that keeps popping up. I don't want it to pop up yet. Would you put us into small breakout groups? So you are going to have, thank you, Rob, for posting the instructions again. But hopefully you wrote down at least a couple words, and we are going to go into breakout groups. And I just want you to share in your small group a couple of your connections and see the different kinds of connections. Karen did write in the breakout group that she does this and she loves to do it because students come up with things that she doesn't even, that she hasn't even thought of. And that's something fun. So Patsy. Thank you. Something that I love to add, because the last few years I've really worked, well, I'm not in the classroom this year, I'm on a leave, but last year through the pandemic, I taught 3 hours of reading, writing, including vocabulary 2 times a week, and really working on active listening skills with my students, because I noticed a lot of my students are really good at talking, but they aren't always the greatest at listening. I can claim that for myself. But it's really easy to add something like after maybe small groups do this, or they're doing this in a breakout room, putting this up. And I do this a lot of times when we're sharing our own connections to vocabulary, and that's having students then report back something original I heard, something thoughtful I heard, something I heard that I had not considered. And so while they're actually listening to each other's connections, they're also actively listening, knowing that they're going to need to share something. Also, sometimes in these groups, I will give them some accountable talk stems that they can use with each other, such as, I agree with your connection, and also, or I would like to build on what you said, or I see it differently. They're just wonderful opportunities, and they don't take much to put up some stems or frames for students to do some of that active listening. Karen, can I ask you, I hate to put you on the spot here, but you said that you do this and you do enjoy it. I just really like to know if you don't want to come, or if you don't want to unmute, just I'd like to know how you choose the words that students can potentially connect to a keyword. And again, if you can unmute, that would be great, but you can also chat. We have a minute here. Would anybody like to unmute and share something original or something thoughtful or something that you hadn't considered that you heard in your group?
You can either raise your hand or simply unmute.
Kristine?
Yeah, here's Mary Jo. Go ahead.
Hi, Mary Jo.
Hi. Something that I've developed in my classroom is to provide a very safe environment where everybody can input. And I have students correcting and helping other students.
But you're going to get background noise.
Could you hear that? I hope you could.
I heard you say you want to provide a safe environment.
Yes, and then after that, I said, I actually have students jump in and help other students with vocabulary. So it's pretty neat. You know, everybody helps everybody.
Well, this can be a low stakes activity. I mean, even if a student says something like, I wish I knew more vocabulary words, that is a completely valid connection that demonstrates that, you know, that they know how to use both words. You can do this at multiple levels of students. Thank you, Mary Jo. Anyone else want to talk about something original or something they heard, or maybe even the connection that they made?
I'll share.
Please.
We've talked about the word association, but we had an additional moment, and we were talking about how we haven't been using tier 2, tier 3 as we should. We may have heard of it in the past, but we hadn't implemented it in our classrooms. And the concern that came with that, but also the idea that no matter what in ESOL, we are teaching vocabulary. But there are systems that exist that are efficient and effective that we can take advantage of that we may not be doing. So today's session's really helpful for letting us improve and address vocabulary instruction more systematically.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, that's it. I'm done here. Everyone have a wonderful conference. No, thank you so much for sharing that, because all of you, you know, and I know there are presenters, people who presented a lot attending here. I mean, that's the best. That's the best that we can hope for when we present. It's like with students, when you see that light go on in the students' eyes, you're like, this was totally so beyond worth it. Like this is perfect. I see chat. How do you go about building a safe environment, Mary Jo? Would you mind, Mary, chatting something in there? Because I do want to get us to the break, but I think that's important. And can you link to those slides right now? I'm not sure. Are you talking about this slide deck? Because this slide deck is available in the participant folder already. Yes, please, Mary Jo, if you could put some tips there, I think that's really important. Before we take a break, one quick tip here to work on shades of meaning with students, and you can go low, you can go high with this. And a couple ways to do this are using kind of number lines. This happens to be with adverbs of frequency. You can do this on a smart board where they can move things around. You can give them, if you're in person, it can be kinesthetic, and you can give them a little envelope and do a little sort here. Having that conversation either in pairs or in a small group. It's the conversation that is so important. Where would we place these words on a continuum from never to always? Another example, and some of you have seen this before, and that's using paint chips. So if you have a stack because you wanted to paint a room in your home and you went to Home Depot or Lowe's or Menards, you can repurpose those. In this case, the blue is matched, obviously, but to work with, again, kind of, you know, the different levels of these words. Here's one with enormous, giant, huge, big. And also I use this as a template where we work sometimes with similar words where I want them to kind of put them in an order that makes sense to them. I do this with connotations. a lot of times. So we did one once, I remember, I'll never forget it, with like unimportant, trivial. There were some words, and we were talking about, we have synonyms, but we also need to know how to use those synonyms, because there's one thing to say, well, that was really unimportant, or that's very trivial. You know, there are shades of meaning in that. And finally, this one I love. I did this in an intro to law class when I was teaching at an alternative high school, where we were talking about this idea of kind of some white collar crime things, and the students had to get into small groups, and they had to put these in an order that made sense to them, and then explain why they did what they did, and the conversation around these words and the level of depth they went into to decide, you know, what's worse, a white lie or an exaggeration. Or it was really valuable. It was really valuable. So these are easy tips. They can be done up on the whiteboard. They can be done, you know, with very low prep in many cases. We're going to take a quick break. Yes, please. Thank you for making that comment, Sherry. Honoring learners L1. Absolutely. And I know there's going to be something on translanguaging here before we go on break. I just want to say that our students' primary language is one of their greatest tools in learning English. So absolutely have your students leverage that primary language whenever they can to help them. We talk a lot about how we want them to learn English, and I'll have students, quite honestly, when they are writing, I'll say, you know what, I have a student, if she didn't know the word, I said, then write it in French. And then just keep writing, like write what you need to write in French, and then keep writing just to get her ideas out. We want them to use that tool. 10-minute break. Thank you so much. I'll see you back here. We're going to talk about some strategies and talk a little bit about word highlighters. So this is how I found out about those sirens. It scared my students and me the first time it happened.
And you will need to reshare your slides. So
yep, I know.
Okay.
Welcome back. I'm going to reshare my slides, and I do want to, jumped ahead here a little bit. I do want to say that that I appreciate so much that the chat is so active, and I do have Patsy and Rob are watching the chat. I'm trying to, when I turn my head, I'm looking at the chat, and please, if somebody asks a question or makes a comment, feel free to add to it or to respond to your colleague. I am not the only, I'm not even an expert. I'm somebody who has a lot of experience teaching vocabulary. I've done a lot of reading. I've done a lot of my own PD, but we all have some wonderful expertise. So I really invite you to connect with your colleagues as well in the chat box, because you have experience and knowledge to share, which is one of the best parts of, we're not unfortunately together and able to work together in person, but we can still connect in the chat box. So word highlighters. Have any of you used, please put in the chat box if any of you have used a word highlighter. This doesn't have to be just an academic word highlighter. It's a tool that you use, a technology tool that you use that helps you locate certain kinds of words. Thank you, Mary Jo. Mary Jo, you've always been so gracious with me. Okay, some of you know, some of you yes. Well, it is definitely a time saver. So we have a mix. Not yet, Danielle, but you're ready to go, I can tell. So let's take a look at the word highlighters or the set of word highlighters that I use most often. But first, let's talk a little bit about high frequency word lists. And we definitely, high frequency word lists are really valuable for a lot of reasons. First of all, vocabulary is daunting, right? We know our students need to learn a lot of vocabulary, and there's so much, do we teach what's in the text? Do we teach, conversational? Do we teach academic words? Do we teach words that, that students are interested in learning? There's so many words. These high frequency lists identify words that are used most commonly in spoken or written English. And they provide lists for our reference if we need them. And they also can help guide us on what are key words to use or to teach. And these are lists that students can access. These are lists that textbook and software developers use. I was part of revising the second edition of Future for Pearson, which is their EL series that equates to Ventures or Standout. And we had quite a lengthy Excel spreadsheet where we were tracking words from the academic word list and making sure that we included those words and activities and texts, and that we were keeping track of the frequency of the exposures. So the very same list that you can use, textbook and software developers are using them as well. So high frequency word lists, and I adapted this thankfully from Marn Frank. This is from her EBRI webinar series, and she talks a little bit about high frequency word lists. And depending on your background, your teaching background, if you are elementary ed or if you've been teaching very low level learners, the Dolch sight words, the Fry instant words, you may or may not know that there have been updates on both lists. The Dolch sight word list was updated last year, and these are valuable for just the common words that make up so much of what students will read and what they will hear. The Fry instant word list, that's a lot more words, and it's broken up by hundreds. That was updated in 1993. Both of these have been around for a long time, but there have been some updates. There's the new general service list, and this is basically spoken and written everyday English. And there are 2,801 head words, but things are broken down. Certainly, we want to break them down into families. This was a 2013 update, and this was written with English learners in mind. And the new academic word list, we have the old one, which is still valuable and I still use it. But this is the new one. This was 2013. We still call it the new one. This is from an extensive survey of millions and millions and millions and millions of instances and documents of spoken and written academic English. Again, there are head words here. The former academic word list, you can get sublists in terms of frequency. I don't know that work. I haven't found that work done yet for the new academic word list. I did put something with links to all of these as well. They're linked here on the slide in the Minnesota ABE Connect newsletter article I wrote about vocabulary it's on the Atlas site from Tuesday, and a little bit more about each of these lists. The EAP Foundation. Lots of things here, but there are different word highlighters out there. I find these ones the easiest to use, and there is a great variety. So you can do a search for the old and the new academic word lists. You can do searches if you're teaching lower level, old and new general service lists. So those are the more common earlier words that we want our students to master, especially to start developing some automatic fluency with words. You can search for collocations, and you can search for discourse connectors. There are others as well. I like the discourse connectors because those, if I'm in a hurry, they will find in order to, also, furthermore, in addition, because those words that connect ideas and show relationships. And again, we can find these words, but we don't have time always. So you choose a highlighter, you paste a text in for results, you click a button, you don't even have to log in. So I do want to quickly show a slide here. These are not all of the highlighters, but they are some of them. And the AWL, that's the academic word list. There's the ACL, that's an academic collocation list. So those words that often go together. The AFL highlighter, it's academic formulas, it's phrases that appear more than 2 words very often, in case of, or due to the fact that, which is subordinating conjunction, but longer than 2 words. You can do multiple highlighting from lists. The new academic word, the discourse connector, so those connecting transition words. I really invite you to play with this a little bit. There are others below this, but I just wanted to show you. And this is pretty much what it looks like. You paste your text in, you click submit, and the words will be highlighted in some different colors. I pasted a text in for a workshop that I did for Colorado last week. I pasted a text in, and within 10 minutes, I had a list of the key academic words I wanted to focus on. I had a list of 3 collocations I wanted to focus on. I pulled out 3 discourse connectors, and I also located, or was able to locate, other words I was just going to prepare to just give the definitions for. It took me 10 minutes. And that was a huge time saver. So here is an example of what you can do. This happens to be from Ventures 1, the 3rd edition student book. So we have a simple, not overly simple piece of text because there are a couple compound sentences here. There's the structure there with the adverb. And so it's not totally simple. Level A, such a huge level because it goes all the way from students who are just learning concept of print to getting ready to transition into the next level, CCRS level B, where they're reading short passages. It is an enormous level. So run this through, and I will give you an example. I ran it through the general service list highlighter and the new academic word list highlighter. And Rob is going to chat out the link. Please don't go play yet, but he's going to chat out the link that will take you directly to the highlighters page. So if you look here, what it highlighted, and yes, you might go, well, yeah, I knew that those were, the ones in gray. I already knew those were, common words, and the second 1,000. But homework is actually an academic word, is considered an academic word. So, and that's interesting because we wouldn't typically think that there would be academic words in level A text, but certainly you can see the benefit as perhaps the text increases in difficulty, or perhaps I was put in a position where I was teaching an entire class of Liberian students who had wonderful oral English and they couldn't read. And so I had to go back and I had to study and go back to the Fry list and the Dolch lists and, kind of reacquaint myself with, of all these common words, I mean, what are the words I really need to start with first and build on? So these can be really helpful, and they can be real time savers. And then you determine what's going to work best for your group. So I really encourage you to try out these highlighters. But then we get all these words, and which words? So another chance in the chat box. Or if somebody would like to unmute, how do you currently identify which vocabulary words to introduce to your students? We have all kinds of ways that we may individually decide depending on our group, depending on our level, depending on the content. How do you currently identify
You can
which
feel free
words?
to raise your hand and I'll keep an eye out.
Thank you,
can-
Patsy.
Yeah, for sure. Or use the chat box if you prefer, although it's more fun to hear from you.
It is more fun. And if you want it narrowed a little bit, if you have a piece of text, how do you identify when you read through it, which vocabulary words you're really going to focus in on. So I'm looking, gut. Yeah. So much of teaching is intuitive, and we're gathering data every moment of instruction as we go. Focus on the words. Yes. Resources, identify words. And in the case where valuable words are being identified, I find that unfortunately, the resource doesn't provide enough practice, which isn't because the writers don't know they need practice. When you work with a publisher, and I don't know if any of you have, I learned with Pearson that they do understand how much practice students need. They do have experts working for them. They are highly limited on space. And so space and money is a big thing. ESL library, yes. Tier 1, Tier 2 words, if they cross over with GED, HSE content areas. Thank you for saying that you collaborate. That's wonderful with the math instructor. The Tier 2 and Tier 3 words. Sometimes you just ask students if there are any words they don't know. Okay, because we certainly want students to have curiosity about words. But what we do want students to know is that that there are higher frequency words and that they don't have to look up. I have some students, they fill notebooks or they come to me with notebooks full of words. And some of those words are really valuable. And some of them I say, you know what, you're probably not going to see this word again, or only another, maybe 1 or 2 times. And it's totally fine to look those words up if you need to. Preview the text, help them drive the vocabulary. It's also fun to preview a text by giving them, and some of you may do that, a handful of the key words and have them make predictions about what the text is going to be about. Yes, we do want to balance. We want them to have that curiosity about words, but we also want to take time to help them learn words that are going to really pay off in their oral and their reading vocabulary. So thank you very much. So it is important to teach the concept of frequency words. We want our students to be curious, but my students have told me they feel so anxious under the weight of all the vocabulary there is to learn. And we have to talk about how none of us know all of the vocabulary, and there are always new meanings for words, new ways to use words. We can't get caught up in that. We have to try to focus on learning well those high frequency words and learning good word strategies to help us unlock the meanings of other ones. And I often have students who want to go to college who are testing very high on the TABE. They're testing at an 11.0, for example. Their academic vocabulary is not very high. They say, I will just look every word up as I'm reading my textbooks, but there's an efficiency piece there. You cannot sustain yourself having to look up, 20 words on a page. It's going to take time. It's going to disrupt comprehension. I love these. Please be looking at these ways that your colleagues are finding words. And there isn't, I'm not here to say there is one right way to do that, because there isn't. She knew every word in French and Arabic. That's amazing. Well, I know there are over 500,000 words in English, and I frequently, in things that I'm reading, research that I'm reading, I come across words I don't know. Yes, it's okay not to know. Thank you, Denise. And that I talk about with my GED students. You're not going to know every word in every passage on the test. You're not. You have to learn to get past that. You cannot know a couple words, okay? And it doesn't spell immediate doom, right? So just like we can't teach them all the content on the GED, we teach them good reading strategies. We teach them some good word learning strategies. So thank you, Denise, for that. So which words would I teach? I'm going to have you get into small groups, and here's how this goes. We're going to take 10 minutes. I have got 4 excerpts. Okay, you're going to be in mixed groups. There's an excerpt from CCRS level A, B, C, and D. I don't care which one your group decides to do. You can do more than one if you have time. If you get into a room where several of you are lower level teachers of lower levels, you may want to go for the, you're really looking for at the tier 1 words. Note the high value words. So these are 3 questions I want you to consider as you're looking at your excerpt. Again, don't do all 4. Choose one, try to get through one, do another one if you have time. Rob is going to put these questions in the chat. Which of these words are essential to understanding the text? Really the key takeaway that you want students to have. Which of these words has high potential for appearing in future texts or in life? And which of these words are inherently valuable teaching opportunities? So we talk about these word families, or you've got words that use common roots, prefixes, suffixes, but it's really worth kind of expanding, taking a little bit of time to expand, because again, it's the mileage that we're talking about. So these are 3 key words I want you to talk about in your group. Rob, also, it's a view only Google Doc. So my suggestion is that you all get into your group, you scan over, you decide on one of the excerpts to use, and then you talk about these 3 questions. Karen, you're not in a group yet. We are just about to have Patsy start the breakout groups.
All right, any questions before I put you in groups? Everyone's clicked on the Google Doc. You've looked, the chat from Rob will stay there. Are we ready?
I think so.
All right, off you go.
This meeting is being recorded.
I would say when we're writing, switch to French. And somebody said, oh, I like that. And that is certainly not something that I came up with on my own. Over the years, I've learned a great deal about teaching English learners from many of our great Minnesota teachers. And of course, having Patsy as a boss helps as well. And she gave me a great book that I would really recommend to people. And I hate to throw this, if you could maybe find a link, Patsy. Writing Between Languages, How English Language Learners Make the Transition to Fluency. And it's a great book because it taught me that when I have mixed groups, so I have what we would call native English speakers, and then I have English learners in the same class, and I want to have them do some quick writing or free writing. I say, it's okay. It's okay to do the translanguaging. It's okay to keep writing. If you have to switch, go ahead and do that and then switch back. Because what I found is that then everybody, it's like an equal playing field. Like everybody feels like they can keep writing and they're not being held, their ideas aren't being held back by their language.
Kristine, you were too fast. What was the name of that book?
That you gave it to me, Writing Between Languages.
Oh, that was smart of me. Okay, I'll find it for you, friends.
And lots of great tips if you have English learners or what we would, who are English learners, right? Not just the CASA score, but you have, more, you're seeing more and more of those students in your higher level classes. It's a great book. So I didn't mean to take that time aside, but it really is a tremendously good book and taught me a lot about students using their primary language as a really important tool.
Kristine, before you switch topics, you have a question from Jamie in the chat.
I see that. I copied and pasted the level C passage to see how it works, but it only highlighted 2 words, 3 and replacement. Well, that means that, I don't know why I highlighted three. Three is a different kind of word. Replacement, though, that in that particular passage, there may not be any words that actually appear on the in the AWL. Yes, because the list, there's a little over 20% overlap between the old and the new academic word list. So those are all of the academic words that appear in your text. And sometimes you do that and you only get one or two words. That brings up the question, does that mean that there aren't any other valuable words? And of course, then as the teacher, you need to make the decision about other words. So sometimes you can end up with 20 words in a piece of text, and sometimes you end up with one academic word. And I've even done it with some levels of text where there are no academic words. So it really depends. And that tells you something also about the text, that text might not be a particularly complex text for your students in terms of vocabulary. That's a great question. I'm glad you're playing already. Quickly, useful tool. This is something I created a handful of years ago. I decided I wanted text-dependent questions, stems, and frames that specifically focused on those 6 language anchors. So I looked at CASAS tests and TABE tests and GED, and I compiled a list of these words. It's useful if you are looking to incorporate more questions when students are reading text about words in the text. It's another useful tool. I can give you a quick example. That's not the example I wanted to give. So for example, these are all questions I made from that list. Why did the writer choose to use the word speeds instead of a phrase like drove fast? That's getting them to, to focus on, in that case, there was definitely some persuasion going on about something. Reread the short email, choose formal language to replace the more informal language in italics. I know that there are people on this call who've definitely done that work with the switching back and forth between informal and formal. In sentence 10, which word could replace the underlined word happy without changing the meaning of the sentences or the sentence? This is like right off of our NRS assessments. How does adding the prefix self change the meaning of the word respect? Which of the following synonyms is closest in meaning to the word honor as it is used in sentence 2? Circle all the addition signal words in a particular paragraph. Circle the phrase or change the phrase rally all of his energy into a literal phrase. And the word season has multiple meanings. How is the word being used in this text? How do you know? I include these questions with my sets of text-dependent questions for comprehension because these are part of understanding the content. So some play. If you only have a little bit of time and you want students to quickly work with a word, there are some things that I often bring in, and sometimes it's just, okay, everybody up on the smart board, or okay, on the screen, or okay, under the document reader, here we go. Alike and different. I picked 2 of the words that we've been working with. I have used a word wall, even at my GED level. That's particularly helpful if you share classrooms with other teachers. We have pull out social studies, we have pull out math, we have pull out science, we have pull out language arts, and having the word wall. Andy and John and Sarah and I are more likely to pull words because we're looking right at them in the back of the room. So they're getting multiple exposures. What is it like or different? Giving them, a chance for an example and a non-example, which is an example of engrossing. So, and why? And my students like these a lot. So I give them 2 choices and they have to tell me which one is an example and why. And sometimes I say, why isn't the other one a good example? Making personal connections. Proponent was a word we had last year. I'm a proponent of blank because blank. I had introduced the word. I had given them a definition. We talked about the part of speech. I had practiced using the word in some contexts. I, had modeled and said, I'm a proponent of the Humane Society, or not killing animals, no kill shelters, whatever. And I model that, and students can make connections. Orally assess vocabulary. And we can give them multiple choice vocabulary quizzes. The best way to assess vocabulary is orally and asking, what does the word mean? They can give an example. This is actually something from what's called the word meaning test. They can give a definition, they can give an example. In some cases, I've had students like physically show me. I always say the word connect, which is on the word reading test. I've had students like show me, like, because students will say, I know what it means, but it's hard to explain. But you know if they know, okay, they can use it in a sentence, and if that sentence demonstrates, that is really the most accurate way to assess vocabulary. Questions, reasons, examples, potential. We spent a little bit of time doing this. You can have them write. You can have them pair, share, get into a pair and talk about this. And, walk around and, and listen for the use of their words. Again, it's a personal connection. True, false, why? Star people, you will recognize this. I like taking a couple of the words that we're working on that could have a relationship, and students have to, this happens to be academic vocabulary. You could certainly do this with any vocabulary. Adverse events should allow people to be exempt from their responsibilities, and students have to think about it. True, false, why? They can talk about it with a pair. They can talk about it in a small group. Sometimes I'll have them write after they talk. It doesn't matter if they think it's true or false. What matters is the why. And I've had students say, yeah, well, if you have adverse events happen, bad things happen, you shouldn't, have to, people are going to have to understand that you might not be able to go to work, or you might not be able to come to school. And someone else in the group says, it doesn't matter what happens. You need to be strong enough to hold up your responsibilities. And that conversation is so rich, and it's important, and it helps them further cement those words. Thinking about choices. Here's what the word react. A person who ate something that tasted good might react by. So there's a little more thinking going on here, where they're applying it to another context. Have you ever? Having students think again about different people who might use these words and how you might use it. Describe a time when you might have to clarify something. How might you clarify a vocabulary word to another student? How might a teacher clarify homework for the class? These often can be low prep if you have a list of words you're working with, and you can put one up. Yes. Thank you, Krista, for that. Yes, when it comes to intermediate level readers, like between a 4th and an 8th grade level, we assume now that academic vocabulary instruction is a need. So we don't even need to formally assess to decide. And the beauty about academic vocabulary is it isn't like, well, if they're at low intermediate, they should use this list of words. And if they're at high intermediate, this list, and low adult secondary, this list. It's a list. And you can pull them off a list, and students across multiple levels can work with the same words. So thank you so much for that. Okay. And here's a spin on teacher created vocabulary questions. So I often like to create a question. They can make a personal connection. But you can also have students do this, and you can put 2 lists on the board, an A list and a B list. Put students in pairs, one gets the A list, one gets a B list. They have to create coherent questions for each word on the list. And then they pair up, they exchange questions, and they can do a little bit of writing. And then they exchange papers again, so they can take a look at what the results were. And it's just a matter of, this happens to be looking at the prefix on and re. So the students each, the A student creates a question for unsafe, unreal, uncover. The B creates for rewrite, reuse, react. They get together in pairs and they swap. Again, vocabulary talk. We did a little bit of this earlier on, and this happened to be a tier 3 concept. Why is individual liberty important for our society? It was connected to something we were reading. And I add that kind of that accountable talk where I want them to say, use the language structure, my idea is similar, or my idea is different from, or my idea builds upon. And then once everybody gets a chance to answer, we have that discussion where they can talk about what something they heard that was original, thoughtful, something they hadn't considered. So again, you know, you can do this with tier 1 words. What is information you like on the internet? Tier 2, a plausible goal I have for the school year. You can do it with those content area words and concepts. Pre-post reading activity. I love doing this. I just did this in some curriculum or a lesson I created for something where I give them a picture that's often related to what we're talking about or reading, and you can do different levels with this. The time, family, cell phone, communicate, attention. Students can write about the picture with those words. Ample impact, interaction, media exposure, role. That's the tier 2 words. And I like this because students can come in where they're at. Some students I know just want to take off and they want to write a paragraph, or they want to try to write 2 sentences with all the words. Some students, I say, you know what? Write 5 sentences. Use each word in a sentence about the picture. So there's multiple entry points for something like this. You can connect it to reading. You can connect it. You can just put a very interesting picture up with some of your target words. Flippity. I don't know if you use Flippity. It's back up and running. This is something, and I know I'm keeping an eye on the time here. I can show this very, very quickly. It's very easy to design. Flippity, you can click on this. It'll take you there with all of their wonderful templates, but my students get a kick out of this. I can show you if I take it down here to 100%, put this together with the student's name. I used this last year, an academic word, and what they have to do with it. So you can spin each of these reels by themselves, or you can spin the whole thing. You spin the whole thing, you say, Pathia, I want, 3 months from now shouldn't be there. I don't know what that was something. Sorry, I didn't change that. But give an example of someone who might use this word and why. Charisma, the word factor. Who might use this word and why? It's really easy to set up. And you can do this. I do this with grammar. I do this with when I want them to write sentences with a certain subject and a certain adjective. It's a lot of fun. And you can create closed sentences on Flippity as well. So in this case, create sentences, students can drag. It's, again, it's a way for them to do like a word sort or something on screen. They can drag the word over the sentence that it fits in. Add words that create more than one possible answer. So then students have to talk about why they chose one and not the other. Word sorts, amazing. This was one I found for math. Talk about doing some language support for math, having them sort the vocabulary that helps them see that that they need to use addition in a word problem or subtraction in a word problem. It's a great language building activity. Penny Brown is going to be doing a session on word sorts tomorrow in the afternoon, so check that out. Morpheme matrices, there's a link in the box. Maren Frank created this. It's a great way to put something up and have students work at how many words can you create and working with these word parts. And if you have a particular pattern that's represented maybe in a piece of text, you might want to take that word part and you might want to do some of this work with students. I know we don't have any time for wrap up. I didn't get a chance for you to reflect on choosing which words you would teach. I hope the discussions were rich. Krista is showing a picture, having them choose which of our vocabulary words they think matches the picture. Please, I hope that you save the chat because this has been a great chat. Which high frequency word list should we use? Our lowest level. I'm going to kick that to Patsy here for a second. Patsy?
Lowest level? Sorry, say it one more time.
The lowest level. I mean, I would think that general service list.
I think the general service list for sure. And I'm not sure if you mean lowest level ESL or native speakers of English. The link to that general service list is in your slides. Is that right, Kristine?
Mm-hmm. It is.
Yeah, so that'll be available too. And then another resource I would direct you to is our ESL online library. And Andrea Eckelberger has collected a variety of great resources for that population as well, if you do mean ESL. I'm going to put a link to that participant folder where you can get the slides, and then the link to all of those various academic lists and word finders and such are all linked in the slides, and you can grab those. Anything else? I'm just checking the chat. Yeah, and Rob, thanks for that reminder on how to save the chat.
And please email me. I know that some of you had questions about good vocabulary resources. Go ahead and email me. Depending on your level, I may have great suggestions, or I will pull people in to the email chain who will be able to make great recommendations for you. Yeah, Patsy brought up a good point. If you're talking about low-level students whose primary language is English, American-born, they're going to know a lot of those general service words, but ELs not so much. And for students whose primary language is English, like a Liberian student, they know those words. They often don't know how to read them, what they look like in print or in writing. Yes, words to learn by.
Yeah, I'm just going to post a link to our online resource library as well. So people have that. I'll pause the recording, although we won't disappear quite yet.